I think we're just past the appointed hour, so if you could all take your seats, we'll get started. Good afternoon. It is afternoon, isn't it? It's dark out there, so maybe it's evening. It's hard to tell this time of year. I want to welcome you to this Interfaith Community Forum on Affirming Troy as a Sanctuary City. And on behalf of our pastor, Pastor Judy Johnson-Sebo, I'd like to welcome you to Christ Church. Pastor Judy is with her grandchildren in Connecticut, so I think she has a good excuse for not being here. But we do welcome you to Christ Church. This church has a long and rich history of activism, and we are pleased to have been invited to participate and host this session here tonight. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items that we need to take care of. We certainly don't expect any emergencies, but should that happen, the exits are the door you came through, and there's another exit in the parish house. You just go through the open door, turn left, and there's an exit there. And the restrooms are along the hallway, just behind me here. And following the program tonight, which I hope will be done in an hour and a half or 2 hours at most, we have refreshments prepared by one of our panelists in Wesley Hall. John Wesley was big in the Methodist Church, so we have a Wesley Hall here. And so join us for that. And that is out this hallway as well. But when you get to the end of the hallway, turn right into Wesley Hall. And you need to be aware, and this is important, you need to be aware that we're live streaming this program over the internet, and later it will be available. I guess I'm no longer in the program, but it'll be available on YouTube. Let me make a couple of introductory comments. During the past several years, immigration has become an issue throughout much of the world. Here in the U.S., we're hearing a lot and reading a lot about the president's proposal to build a wall along our southern border. What to do with the so-called dreamers brought here as infants by their undocumented parents. Separation of children from their parents at the southern border, causing the death of a 7-year-old, which we just learned about yesterday. Caravans of people fleeing violence in Central America are now being forced to live in horrible conditions, again, just south of our border. There's also the president's challenge to birthright citizenship. And then there's the question of sanctuary, which we're gathered here to talk about tonight. And this forum is a bit different from other meetings that we've had on this topic. I'm sure many of you were at the Public Safety Committee meeting last week, and this is sort of like that, but not quite the same. Today we are seeking a snapshot of the faith community's perspective on the proposal to designate Troy a sanctuary city. At this time, let me ask Councilman David December to come forward and read the resolution that he's authored and give him a chance to bring us up to date on what the status is and what we might be doing in the future. David?
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank all of the panelists and faith leaders, as well as the community, for being here today. I was asked to speak to the resolution, and I do want to just, I would like to read the resolution for everybody, and also to give a little more context of what this is all about. But first, let me just say that I did introduce this resolution because to look for the goal of making sure everyone remains safe in our community. The policies at the federal government and county level have made people with and without documentation more unsafe. This feeling of a lack of trust is something that is breathed between our community and law enforcement, as well as our other city services, makes us all less safe. This is an effort to ensure that we address that and that people feel comfortable calling the police when something in our communities happens. It has been proven in the experiences of other sanctuary cities, both in the state as well as across the country, that these types of resolutions have indeed made our communities safer or as safe as other cities in our country. Cities nearby include Hudson and Albany, and there are cities all across the country with this type of resolution, including Boston, Philadelphia, and New Orleans, that have indeed continued to be safe places to live and raise families. Some politicians have tried to paint this as divisive, and that ignores the context in which the federal and county level officials have divided people and sown fear into our community. This was a measure to address that. This was a measure to address that, and it is not the cause of this division. We have held two very public meetings at this point in the City Council that were very well attended and largely supportive of this measure. Indeed, we have also been spending time in our communities visiting neighborhood associations to ensure we can continue educating people on this issue. And through that process, we have also seen more support, which is very, very heartening to me. Let me just say another reason that this is meaningful to me is I myself am the son of an immigrant. My father, I'm a first-generation American on my dad's side, and I'm a second-generation American on my mom's side. And so I have seen and experienced what distrust can lead to, and it is my hope that when we stand together, we can reaffirm the values that all of us do believe in. And indeed, I think it will lead us to a better, safer place. The issue of immigration is a federal issue. ICE has an office right here in the Capital District. They have the funding and resources to handle those jobs. Troy has limited resources, and we should continue to invest those resources into public safety, into our infrastructure, into our communities, and not have them burdened with additional requirements to do federal law enforcement's job. I will make one other point. I've been asked why we're doing this, and I wasn't elected to office to do what was politically expedient. I was elected to do what was right, and it's my belief that this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to once again thank our panelists today for being here, and for all of you for being here. I did say I was going to read the resolution. I do. It is actually it's not that long. It's 2 pages. So if folks are okay with me just reading the resolution, and we can have the conversation continue. So this resolution is resolution number 113, affirming the city of Troy as a sanctuary city. We in the city, whereas the city of Troy, New York is proud to be a city that values its ethnic, racial, linguistic, religious, and socioeconomic diversity as a source of our city's strength. The city of Troy values these contributions that have been made by immigrants for the benefit of the city. Whereas the city of Troy is committed to upholding and protecting the civil and human rights of all individuals within the city, and has long prohibited discrimination based upon race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other protected characteristics in the provisions of its services and the enforcement of the laws. The enforcement of federal immigration laws is the prerogative of federal enforcement agencies, not local law enforcement agencies. It is particularly essential to the mission of the city's emergency services department that victims report crimes or injuries, cooperate fully in investigations, and summon help when needed. The Troy Police Department currently has a practice that it does not inquire into a person's immigration status upon initial contact. and the city has no formal existing agreements to enforce federal immigration policy. The City Council is committed to resisting threats against privacy and liberty by taking meaningful steps to ensure that our communities are safe and that all residents can live and pursue their livelihoods in peace and prosperity. A number of municipalities across the country and in the state are resisting threats against individual rights to privacy and liberty by taking these steps to ensure the safety and the rights are respected so that their municipality may continue to thrive. Federal law does not require local law enforcement or other local service providers to inquire into an individual's immigration status or to respond to federal immigration and customs enforcement detainer requests. And whereas the Rensselaer County Sheriff's 287G agreement with ICE may undermine public trust and cooperation with local law enforcement and poses a threat to public safety and necessitates corrective action by the City of Troy. There are a few more measures that are a little more technical, but for the sake of time, I'm going to cut to the end because I know we have panelists that are looking to discuss this issue. So be it further resolved that the City of Troy Police Department shall not inquire about the immigration status of an individual, including a crime victim, a witness, or a person who calls or approaches the police seeking assistance, unless necessary to investigate criminal activity by that individual. Be it further resolved that the City of Troy Police Department shall not stop, question, interrogate, investigate, arrest, or detain an individual based solely on actual or suspected immigration or citizenship status, or a civil immigration warrant, or an immigration detainer in the individual's name. Be it further resolved that the City of Troy Police Department shall not engage, assist, or support immigration enforcement except as follows: in response to an articulated direct threat of life or public safety, when such services are required to safely execute a criminal warrant or court order issued by a state or federal court, or where it has been demonstrated that a state or federal statute or regulation require local law enforcement cooperation. This resolution essentially states that we should continue the practices that we are doing, and in doing so, it'll improve our public safety. That's what this conversation is about tonight, and I look forward to hearing from the panelists as well as the community to look at this conversation from the lens of a theological lens. And thank you once again for all attending.
Thank you, David. We're going to let the panel speak in just a minute, but we have a couple of other procedural things that I need to go over with you. Each panelist will speak for 5 to a maximum of 10 minutes. I've chatted with them beforehand, and it seems like they're closer to 5 minutes than 10 minutes, and that might be good. But they do have 5 to 10 minutes. After they've all spoken, they may do some interacting with each other. We'll see how that goes. But after they've spoken, it'll be your turn to make a comment and or ask a question. And we'd like you to stand in place. This is how it's different from some of the other meetings that we've had. Stay where you are, but stand, please, and we'll have Laura Rabineau bring a microphone to you, and you can ask a question or make a comment. And you will have a maximum of 3 minutes to ask your question and make your comment. Now let's meet the panel. On the far end, we have Deacon Jerry Ford of the United Ordained Church. Raise your hand. Pastor Gusty Newquist, First United Presbyterian Church, just up the street from here. Ted Hartman, an immigration attorney. Rabbi Deborah Gordon, Congregation Beret Salom. Reverend Jeremiah Lennox with the Nemeton of the Way, and lay leader Deborah Byers of Christ Church United Methodist. So at this time, let me ask Deacon Ford to make his comments either in place or you can come to the podium. Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. We're here to discuss the issue that is simply based on right and wrong. Love trumps hate. Light shines in darkness. Darkness could never outshine light. I don't care how dark a room is, one iota of light can brighten that room. With that being said, we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We live in a country that was built on immigration. None of us were invited here. Well, we all came, we all wound up being here. So who are we to say that people who are seeking some of the same oppressions that the founders of this country say that they can't be here? It's time that we get some things right. We've gotten a lot of things wrong over the last couple of years, maybe decades, but this is something that we have an opportunity to really get things right. In the Bible, it says that we love God with all our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. And then we love our neighbors as ourselves. And if we truly do love ourselves, then we would extend that very same love to the ones that are coming here. We would do everything in our power, whatever possibilities that we can give them for a life full of hope and opportunity, we should extend to them. Just hearing the resolution itself, it's not saying that we should change the way things are. It's just that they're set in a place, and we shouldn't let what others deem to be the right thing interfere with something that's already been set in place. In my opinion, it looks like there has been an attack on the immigrants, and a lot of them are just trying to seek a better way of life. Simple. And if we extend the same love to them, I feel that we can get back to some of the values, some of the morals that made this country great, the great country that it is.
Thank you. Pastor Newquist.
Good evening. I'm the Reverend Gusty Newquist, pastor of First United Presbyterian, just down this street. And about 10 years ago, when I was in Boston, looking for a church to serve, I never thought I would end up serving a church in Tucson, but I did. So before I served a church in Tucson, I had sort of a theoretical understanding that we should, of course, love our neighbor and welcome immigrants, and that, and I knew that, at least in the Presbyterian world, that Presbyterians had been working for comprehensive immigration reform for quite some time, and that I know the Bush administration had tried and failed to pass comprehensive immigration reform. The Obama administration tried and failed. So again, I had this theoretical understanding of how we should be welcoming to immigrants. Then, of course, as I became a pastor in Tucson, it became pastoral. So a significant part of my congregation was immigrant, some documented, some not documented. Many of the parishioners I worked with were teachers in the school system. Many of their students were undocumented. I started walking the migrant trails and learned about the wall that's already there that is funneling people to the most dangerous parts of the desert. And in fact, people were dying, and my congregation was one of the congregations that was out there in the desert, sometimes finding people's bodies. Children who had died in the desert. It became very real, what people are leaving in order to come here, and that the dangers of the desert were better than what they were leaving. It became very personal. Since then, I've served at church in San Antonio and here, and in both congregations, worked with immigrants as parishioners, documented and undocumented. Even here in Troy, as I said at the Public Safety Committee hearing, you have RPI students, Presbyterians from other countries who go to RPI, on a student visa and then find themselves waiting for a work visa to come through, and lo and behold, there's a gap between when the student visa runs out and when the work visa comes. Well, the student from Canada can just go back to Canada and wait it out. The student from Cameroon, if she goes home, she will likely die in a civil war that is attacking her people in her city. So it's personal. This is a pastoral, personal issue and not just a theoretical one. However, as a pastor, of course, my theological approach must be grounded in the Bible. And so what if you look at the Bible? Well, if you look at the Bible from the story, from the perspective of what it is to be an immigrant, it turns out the whole thing is a story of migration. Am I right? From getting expelled from the garden and having to find a way in a new hostile land, from being a murderer and being marked as a murderer and yet having a mark of protection placed on you. This is the story of Cain. He has a mark of protection placed on him as he seeks a new place to live, even though he's a criminal. And so then I have to question this conversation of, oh, we can have immigrants as long as they're not criminals. Well, that's not actually biblical either. Even the criminal in the Bible is protected as a migrant, is protected as an immigrant. I could go on and on, but of course I have to focus on the story of Jesus as a Christian pastor, and every part of the biblical story of Jesus is the story of a migrant family seeking sanctuary. Every part of it. From having to cross 2 countries, from Galilee through Samaria, through Judea, to register in citizenship. Am I right? Yeah. And we're in this season. We're talking about this right now. We're preaching this right now, the birth of Jesus. There's so many migrants. He was very likely part of a migrant caravan. They didn't do this by themselves. I mean, we see the story of Mary and Joseph on a camel as if it's a solo trip. No, they were part of a migrant caravan. When they land in Bethlehem, it's so packed there's not enough room for them. I mean, you can literally see Jesus on that border at San Diego right now. You can literally see the story happening right now. It's the same story. And then that's not even the end, right? They have to flee to Egypt, right? Because a tyrant wants to kill the kids. So it's not just personal and pastoral now, it's also an article of faith. Are we going to welcome the Christ child or not? So then, of course, I look to the legislation itself, the sanctuary city legislation, and I will say both of the, you know what, I'm not so sure about Tucson, but in San Antonio is a sanctuary city, and that worked out very well. In fact, they're being sued right now for being a sanctuary city. Please God, let them win. But it worked out quite well, where the local immigrant community knew they could trust the police, and it worked out well. Presbyterians are nothing if not people of paper. We pass a lot of policies, and I have many handouts if you want copies of them. Our last comprehensive policy on immigration was in 2012, but we re-endorsed it this summer because of everything that's been happening. And there's a key part, there's so many parts of our church policy, but the one that is really appropriate for tonight is that Presbyterians are called to educate and advocate in partnership with religious, business, community, and law enforcement leaders for reform and action. And one of the things we're asked to do is to focus law enforcement on the maintenance of community safety and fostering the growth of positive relationships and confidence between law enforcement and immigration populations. So that's what we're here doing tonight. We believe very strongly that this legislation does exactly that. It is a small way for us, for we who are Christian in this season, to say we welcome the Christ child right here in Troy. I'll close by saying that in many of our churches we have a song. You may know this song. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Amen.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman.
Good evening. My name is Ted Hartman. I'm an immigration attorney, but I'm also a criminal defense attorney. And my practice really focuses on undocumented people who are in the criminal justice system, who have potential crimes that they're facing that could impact their immigration status, but then also people who are in the removal setting, people who are have been put in removal proceedings either in down at 26 Federal Plaza in Manhattan, or whether it's in Batavia, New York, or Buffalo, New York. So sometimes I'm helping people who have faced criminal charges and they're about to be removed. And how that applies to Sanctuary, I think I can illustrate with a couple of cases that I'm doing right now. One is a murder case in which it's actually right out here in Troy. I have a client who is being prosecuted by the Rensselaer County District Attorney's Office, and he happens to be undocumented, but that's not why it's relevant. It's relevant because several of the witnesses in the case are undocumented themselves. So what has the Rensselaer County District Attorney's Office done? Well, they've reached out to the immigration courts. So they've reached out to the immigration courts and sent letters and said, please give special consideration to our witnesses, okay? And, you know, to the extent that these letters have any kind of actual impact on the cases themselves, I don't know. But it does demonstrate that even if in their words, the Troy Police and the Rensselaer County District Attorney's Office don't want to recognize the value of Sanctuary, certainly by their actions they do. Because when they want someone to stay, they certainly go to bat for that person to stay. The other way in which, so there's that one case where they're going around offering Sanctuary to the extent that they can to their witnesses. The other way that it works is that, and some speakers have touched on this, is protecting witnesses and victims in cases. So I have another client, also Rensselaer County, also involved with the Troy Police, who was the victim of an attempted murder case. So he was working at his job, someone was steal from the job, and so he goes and tells the police about it, he tells his boss about it, and the guy tries to kill him. So this happens here in Troy. And so the guy goes to the police, and the police prosecute the guy. He testifies before the grand jury, and the guy is now on the run. He leaves, and he's somewhere in Mexico. They can't really find him right now. But it was the assistance of an undocumented person in testifying. Now, if that undocumented person is afraid of testifying, it makes a place like Troy more dangerous. Now, I'll tell you that Troy Police Department is saying that they haven't, you know, it's in the resolution, that the Troy Police Department is saying that they already have this policy in place. But then they're simultaneously fighting the policy. You have to ask yourself, why? I don't know. I'm not saying that they're lying, but I am saying that with all the cases, I get 2 to 3 potential immigration clients out of Buffalo calling me. Well, they're not from Buffalo, but their cases are in Buffalo. I get like 2 or 3 a week, and every single one of them is from Troy. Not a single one of them is ever from Albany. Albany's a sanctuary city. Troy is not a sanctuary city. So you have to wonder why it is the Troy Police Department and the police union is fighting this resolution if they say, in fact, it's something that they're already doing. And the other issue is a U visa, and this is something that we can practically help people with as well. If you've been the victim of a serious crime, like my client, who I talked about, was the victim of a serious crime in the sense that he was a victim of an attempted murder, you can apply for what's called a U visa, where a U visa is basically you apply to eventually become a permanent resident of the United States, but it's a very lengthy process. Now the problem is you have to get certification from the local police department. So for example, I had a case in Newburgh where some guys jumped a Guatemalan. The Guatemalan helped the police prosecute this guy. And then I turned around to the police department and I said, well, it's time to certify or time to sign this paperwork saying that that my guy was very helpful to your case. And they said, well, we don't get involved in immigration cases. So I said, so wait, let me get this straight. This guy helped you, and now you won't help him. And they wouldn't. They absolutely refused to help him. So I leaned on a Latina councilwoman in Newburgh. She put some pressure on the local police chief, and then they signed it. So one thing we can do on an individual level, in addition to pushing for Sanctuary, is at an individual level, we can find undocumented folks who have been the victims of crimes and tell them, you should apply for a U visa. And if they don't, if the police department won't assist these people, which many upstate police departments will. You go to Yonkers, you go to Port Chester, they'll tell you, well, we don't do anything with immigration. What's really great about that too is if we can get them on the record saying that they don't enforce immigration or they don't have anything to do with immigration when it comes time to helping our clients, then they can't turn around and then say that it's their responsibility to enforce immigration. So that's a way to apply pressure on them. Because if they're claiming that, well, they have to enforce immigration or they should help ICE, it goes both ways. They should be helping USCIS getting victims of crimes able to stay here. A couple of the speakers talked about the role of the federal government. They have ICE already. They can enforce immigration to the extent that they want to. It is not the job of the Detroit Police Department to enforce federal immigration law because it's first of all, it's not their job. As the speaker said earlier, they have limited resources, and it actually works against their mission of enforcing state laws. So you have to ask yourself, why would the Detroit Police Department want to support a policy or be against a policy that actually helps them do their job by talking to witnesses? And lastly, what I'll say to conclude is that if you look at the migration of Latino population, 30 years ago, it was very concentrated in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and then it's migrated northwards to Rockland County, Westchester County, and it's, within 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to have a substantial Latino population, much more than now, in places like Troy, Schenectady, and Albany. So you have to have the resources in place to be able to properly handle that influx. And if you don't have Sanctuary, you're going to have, you have MS-13 and you have MARAs in Long Island right now who are operating in towns that won't do Sanctuary, and they have a field day. So as the population moves north, are the bad guys going to choose to be in Troy, or are they going to choose to be in Albany? They're going to choose Troy. They're going to decide to deal drugs in Troy because the local population, without Sanctuary, is not going to operate with the police. Meanwhile, they're not going to go to Albany because Albany, the population, will talk directly to the police. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Gordon.
So I'm going to go back to Leviticus because, as Pastor Gusty said, this is not a new issue. וכי יגור איתך גר בארצכם, לא תונו אותו, כאזרח מכם, יהיה לכם הגר הגר איתכם, ואהבת לו כמוך, כי גרים הייתם בארץ מצרים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Or, so the word is ger. A ger is a person who dwells somewhere, who lives somewhere on a less than completely permanent basis. And biblically, well, in the Torah, it's contrasted with ezrach. And ezrach is the person it's the native. It's the person who was born into the dominant community, right? So if a migrant, an outsider, someone who comes from elsewhere, lives with you in your land, don't oppress them. Treat them like an ezrach. Treat them like the native. That's how they should be with you. You love that person like yourself. Love the outsider person like yourself. Why? Because you yourself were outsiders in the land of Egypt. And then it finishes with, I am your eternal God. Why does that matter? Because every time Torah references, I am God, I am God, I am God, you're supposed to do this because I am God, it's reminding us we are supposed to live up to what's godly inside of us. And you don't have to believe in God to recognize that there is a part of us that reaches for the best. Why is this repeated over and over and over and over? It's in Exodus, it's in Leviticus, it's in Deuteronomy. Because it's hard. It's really easy to espouse loving the outsider when there aren't any outsiders around. But how do you know that your values are really your values? When you live up to them when it's not easy to live up to them. And the other thing, slightly later in Leviticus, in my favorite chapter, 25, it reminds us, Ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. God speaking to, okay, here to the Israelites, but let's universalize it. Right? That which is eternal, saying to that which is human and transient, you yourselves are temporary dwellers with me. And it's in the context of the land belongs to me. So, yeah, people get scared. Yeah, it's easy to say, well, that's a great ideal, but in the real world, well, they lived in the real world as well. And it's repeated over and over because it was hard for them too. But this is our guidance. Got one more thing to read to you. This is kind of fun. Numbers chapter 20. From Kadesh, Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you've heard about all the hardships that have befallen us, how our ancestors went down to Egypt. We lived there a long time. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our ancestors. We cried to the Eternal, who heard our plea and sent a messenger who freed us from Egypt. Now we're in Kadesh, the town on the border of your territory. Allow us then to cross your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We'll follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor to the left until we've crossed your territory. But Edom answered them, you shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you with the sword. No, really, we'll stay on the beaten track, said the Israelites. If we or our cattle drink your water, we'll pay for it. We're only asking for passage on foot. It's a small matter. You shall not pass. It's not a new problem, and it's not a new solution. There are laws that deal with criminal behavior, but that is a separate issue than whether a person who is living here feels safe interacting with the officials, not just the police, but any official of the city. Your outsider, your immigrant, the one you are responsible for, shall be like the native.
Thank you. Reverend Lennox.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. To speak of Sanctuary from the perspective of sacred earth, allow me to share with you the sacred promise of the land of liberty enshrined by the bardic gift of Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that turns city's frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shores, send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Now here we are, people of faith and of reason, exploring together as one people out of many the sacred promise of sanctuary, that this land which sustains us has given into our collective care. Indeed, here we are, the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of immigrants huddled together for warmth and dialogue, only a short distance off from the mighty Hudson River, whose mouth is one of those sea-washed sunset gates to the realm of liberty. Here we are, children of earth and starry heaven, whose bones are drawn from the minerals of the land, whose blood is enriched by the waters of the sea, whose lungs draw the breath of life from the sky which covers us all. Here we are, brothers, sisters, non-binary siblings, asking who is entitled to sanctuary, when in fact we are all the heirs of those who have gone before us, claiming that hallowed sanctuary of these shores. And just like the gift of light that is not diminished when shared, only magnified, so too is it that in our own sanctuary is not diminished, but magnified in glory when we open our hearts and arms to all people in sharing that great gift, with open hands extended in dignity and in compassion. Excuse me. As a Druid who sees the face of the divine through our web of relationship, I must ask this. How can we stand honorably in the gaze of our ancestors if we deny that same gift they sought to those who approach us today? Who are we to deny human dignity? Thank you again for all joining us.
Thank you. Ms. Byers.
Yeah, just closer. Hello, I'm going to stand just so that I can see you all. So I'm Debbie Byers, and I'm in the leadership team here at Christ Church. So at Christ Church, we consider ourselves disciples, I guess, of progressive Christianity, where we really concentrate a lot on the life of Christ and what that means for the example of divinity made human. As Christy mentioned, the Holy Family, as we see them, were refugees for the early part of Christ's life. They were escaping political terror. They kept Christ alive by fleeing. How many of the people at the border are trying to create life for their children? That must have shaped his experience and his way of being and preaching in the world. So now, 2,000 years later, we are thinking about these same issues in the light of somebody who was informed by living it. As United Methodists, we claim Jeff Sessions as one of our own. So you can tell there's divisions, many divisions within the denomination. But I will say that Jeff Sessions was brought up on charges by the people of his geographic area of our church. It's very uncommon for a layperson to be brought up on charges for violating the principle of the church, and the matter got dropped by our judicial council. But I thought it was such an act of hope and for the denomination that happened, that they said, you're an official in a high place. You need to be living your faith. You need to be living it as we study it and experience it. And that means that we don't snatch children from their parents and assume that we somehow know what's better for them, or snatch children from their parents and then not be able to account for where they are, or snatch children from their parents and let them dehydrate and starve. That's a terrible thing for us. Our denomination has two main books that it goes by. We also are people of paper, lots of them, and method. That's Methodist. So one of them is the Book of Discipline, and the other is the Book of Resolutions. So in the Methodist Church, we don't have like one person like the Pope, who's the head of it. We have a body that's made up of representatives from around the world, from the various geographic areas, who come together every 4 years and make the laws of the church and make the rules and set up the principles. And so this book of discipline has something in it called Social Principles, our book of social principles. And it talks about migrants and immigrants and welcoming the sojourner, so welcoming the person who travels. And that is sort of the whole story of the Bible, really. I mean, it's all about travelers. And in fact, for us here at Christ Church, our tagline is that we're on a journey with Christ, questioning, serving, and growing. And so we all have that sense of journey. And so we should be welcoming those who are actually journeying. Over the years, Methodist Church has, one of the things that's really interesting is, given all our divisions, that comes together and it votes on stuff. We've added language. In 2016, there was language added to the Book of Discipline and to our Book of Resolutions about this issue of immigration and also about sanctuary. The actions of the church are that we advocate for equal treatment of legal immigrants, at least. They very carefully haven't really addressed the undocumented, except to say that everybody needs to be safe, and we need to recognize the divine in all. In practice, though, since 2016 and since, even before the current administration came into office, there was a commission on immigration and treatment of migrants. It's become even more active since 2017. There are many churches within the denomination that claim themselves to be sanctuary churches. So not just that they're in a sanctuary, but that they're welcoming people and providing safety and shelter to undocumented. There is a current case right now where in North Carolina, where somebody who'd been a member of the congregation for 20 years, turns out he's undocumented. And it sort of came to light when he went to his home country of Bolivia, and coming back in, he was kind of flagged. But he came in to take care of his wife who was ill. The whole family has attended a particular church in North Carolina, and he, after that situation of leaving the country, coming back and getting a lot of trouble, he was taken in by his church to actually live there. The church had been advocating for him, had gotten some legal help. He was told that he needed to go to an appointment with immigration, and he did, and while he was there, they detained him. And 27 United Methodists got arrested for surrounding the van, so they couldn't drive away with him. So this happened on November 26th. There's a hearing January 15th. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. I was kind of pumped to read about it. But those situations are happening all across the country. And here we applaud that because we think that our country at the moment is large enough with resources enough to be welcoming. And it's not to break laws, but the laws need to be made sensible. And sometimes, again, back to the life of Christ. Christ, for all of his 33 years, was challenging authority. So we think that for the authority where it was disenfranchising. So we think we should do that too.
Thanks, Debbie. Well, we've heard from the panel. Now it's time to hear from you. If you have a question or comment or both, keep it within 3 minutes. And Laura will bring you the mic. So raise your hand. No questions? No comments? Have one down here.
Good evening. I'm Reverend Lauren Willett-Berchier, also of the Nemeton of the Ways. I actually had a question for Mr. Hartman. In your discussions, you had presented that essentially if we did not become a sanctuary city, there would be no particular advantage that doesn't already exist. However, one would assume that there has to be some sort of underpinning. What, if anything, could you postulate would be an advantage that the city would, that the Troy police would receive, as many of them are so adamant that this should not be the case, that we should not become a sanctuary city? What possible advantage could they gain in any way to make sense as to why they would oppose this measure so vehemently?
Why would they? Your question is, what advantage the Troy Police Department would have by agreeing to have a
by opposing the measure, by opposing us becoming a sanctuary city.
Why are they so against it?
Why are they so against it? But largely, if there's an underlying legal or political reasoning, some sort of advantage they would gain, either on some manner of federal level. Ultimately, I'm trying to understand the reasoning beneath it, above and beyond what could just simply be racism and bigotry.
Yeah.
But
I was talking to Siobhan about this yesterday, who asked me to be on this panel, and we discussed at length this exact issue. And
what was that?
We discussed this exact issue.
Okay.
And the only thing that we could come up with really is the pervasiveness of white supremacy. And members of the Troy Police Department who are probably pretty reactionary, and to them, it would be so insulting to them to allow Troy to become a sanctuary city, despite the fact that they know very well that in practice they do things that are consistent with being a sanctuary city, that they are right-wing, they are probably many Trump supporters, many racists among their ranks, and because of that, they are against it, even though that they know on an individual level that they have to do it in order to properly pursue their cases. Now, I will say that, for example, in the case where my client was the victim of an attempted murder, I think the officers that I'm dealing with on that case are pretty good. That they want to help my guy. They recognize that he was very instrumental in assisting their prosecution, and he's also trying to help track this guy down in Mexico, and we're in communications, and this is a law enforcement plus for them, and they know that. Now, are those officers going to then turn around internally in the locker room and say to the other officers, hey, you know what, sanctuary is not just a bad thing, because you know what, we're doing it, it's actually pretty helpful? No, because of the culture. That's why they don't do it internally. But on an individual level, I'm not saying every Troy police officer is bad, but there are enough bad apples in that department to exert the pressure to oppose this.
I know you asked specifically him, but I just want to speak to human nature. As a pastor who will often see the best for my congregation and try to get them to do it, and their response is, well, you're not the boss of me, right? I mean, it's just human nature, right? To say, if it didn't come from me, then it feels like you're forcing me to do something that didn't come from me. So I'm certainly not wanting to defend the other position, but I can also sympathize just by human nature to feel forced into something that you didn't ask for. No. I'm just trying to make things maybe a little lighter hearted. Just to say, it's human nature when you're told what to do to resist it. That's all.
Mr.
Somebody's
Ford.
trying to force you to do something.
Because I need to go home and eat Chinese food with my family.
Hang on just a minute, please.
Okay.
Mr. Ford was going to add something, I believe.
I just wanted to add on to that. In my opening statement, I said the fact that we have an opportunity to get some things right. And truth be told, we all know that there are a lot of things that are wrong about the way immigrants, individuals have been handled and things have been done as a practice in this country. As of lately, the last couple of years, there has been an intent of fear regarding this immigration of brown and black people. Let's be real. And it's been placed there. And it's time for us to move away from that. And as I stated, light will outshine darkness, and love will always trump hate. It's time for us to truly get back to loving one another, despite the undertones, despite the intent for this hate or this fear to come about. There are people here in our country that are doing far worse things than what is supposed to be happening when these immigrants come into our country. It's time for us to move away from that fear and get back to loving one another, loving thy neighbor as thou love thyself.
My name is Nora McDowell, and I'm a resident of Troy, New York. And I didn't feel safe to come to the city council meeting the other night. And I'm a white woman with privilege and a loud voice. But I would like to read my statement that I put on Facebook and that I emailed to our mayor, Patrick Madden, and to our city council people. And we are the culture, and we are the sanctuary. Some politicians in our city have been very brave with bringing up this issue. They have been politically battered because we have a new vector called Facebook, which can be used for good, but can be used for personal harassment as well. Dear Troy City Council representatives, written by Nora McDowell, who is married to Ton Wing, and my phone just went, out, but I'll be right back. That's okay. Put in the passcode so it knows who I am. We are a nation of passcodes and documents. As a Troy resident and voter, I support Troy becoming a sanctuary city. As a member of a Troy family with a household member that came to this country as a Vietnam War child refugee, I support immigrants, and I benefit from immigrant energy and work. My husband Ton's fix-it-up, striving work ethic built our Troy family home. Yet I remember times when prejudice has not always welcomed him, even at City Hall. Bias is the problem we do not discuss enough in our Enjoy Troy stories. We are thrilled with the recent Troy Asia energy infused in our city neighborhoods. Life is grand. Our national immigration policy is broken, and the current Citizen One, President Trump, is making life harder for refugees and scapegoating immigrants. I am a mom worried about my family friends in our small city with a high child poverty rate in Troy, New York. I also have urged the Department of Homeland Security to withdraw the proposed public charge rule. This rule illegally discriminates against immigrants with disabilities and penalizes children, senior citizens, families, and others if they are likely to access critical medical programs, or food stamps, or maybe weatherization, or maybe school aid, we don't know. I worry about the impact this would have in my city of Troy, New York, on families who already have it hard. I worry that children would go hungry because their parents don't dare apply for needed food stamps. The United States is made of immigrants seeking to improve their lives, and changing that would change the soul and character of our country and our city of Troy. I can remember vividly the times in my life that I have had to call the Troy police because I or a family member had been hurt by a crime. It is a very hard time, and that is not the time to investigate immigration status. I believe we are actually assisting our Troy police, our Troy firefighters, our City of Troy officials, our Troy school personnel, and our neighborhood residents in being clear that immigration status will not be inquired about unless relevant to the criminal investigation process. Be clear that together we are all protecting and serving. We depend on each other to be a safer city. So we make this clear that Troy, New York protocols follow the Sanctuary City model of public safety. Sadly, our U.S. President and now our Rensselaer County Executive, Steve McLaughlin, are grandstanding in the worst political speech that becomes hate-mongering in social media and endangers the people of color in our communities, because there are white Canadians living among us. Please fight the fear and make it clear that immigrants are welcome here. I do want to thank the Troy City Council for its cooperation across political party lines in supporting the need for our Troy public swimming pools to be rehabbed and reconstructed in South Troy and Lansingburg. As the summers get hotter, children got dehydrated here too. Swimming pools to be rehabbed and reconstructed in South Troy and Lansingburg are needed. They're an investment for families that live in Albany and especially in Troy, New York. I appreciate all the Troy people on both sides, people who are now scared by the Sanctuary City, knew they needed their pools, who kept attention on this quality of life issue. I hope we never have another 3-year swimming drought. I look forward to our people swimming together, not being blocked by borders between Watervliet and Cohoes and Troy, getting to enjoy Troy with a safe and comfortable quality of life for all of us. The places that help children and families will grow and thrive. War makes refugees. So does climate change. Peace and be cool. Mic drop, Nora McDowell. Troy, New York.
I think we had a comment on the first question. Go ahead.
I guess I was just thinking in terms of the question about why is it that the police oppose such a thing. I think one of the things that we fail to do sometimes is we really need to ask the police. I mean, we really need to direct questions like that in an open and listening kind of way to the people who don't agree with us to see where we might have common ground. I mean, I guess my interactions with the Troy police have been, there have been some that have been frightening and some that have been really remarkable, where they've shown kindness and compassion. And in this city, they are the ones that we look to when there's issues of people on the street who need medical or mental care. And often they are quite well schooled. And so I think we have some mechanisms in place where we expect the best. And I think as citizens of this of this city, we expect the best. And that often we are given it, but we're given it most often when we make that a possibility rather than make an assumption that that's not what's going to happen. And so I know for myself, I sometimes, especially if I don't know a situation, I'll jump to conclusions or make assumptions, and it's not always right. That sometimes you really can work with people. And I've had that happen here. And I think we just need to remember to act out, for us to act out that part of our faith experience too, is that there's divine everywhere. And look to it and expect it.
Next, let me remind you of the 3-minute time that you have.
Yeah, this is quick. First off, I just wanted to say I'm Raquel Velio. I'm a Troy resident. I'm an immigrant, not first generation, not any of it. I'm Brazilian-Italian, moved to Troy about a year ago. First and foremost, I grew up as an atheist. Completely, both parents refused to baptize me, but with a Methodist grandmother and a Catholic grandfather, both who were very disappointed by the fact that I was not baptized. But one of the things that I think is beautiful in this moment is that we have decided to join over all of our faiths and have this conversation about sanctuary, which is such a strong and beautiful word. I think one of the most important things that was brought forward by Deborah Byers by mentioning Jeff Sessions is that our congregations and our communities are not homogenous in any way, shape, or form. So I'm sure that even within your own congregations, you've heard voices of dissent. I think I'd like to ask panelists to speak a little bit to dissent. Have you faced those barriers, and what type of conversations have you been able to have around that as supporters of the resolution, and what could we all learn from those conversations that you've had to make converts of a different sort? Thank you.
We're all nodding our heads and saying, excellent question. And I'll speak, by and large, the congregations I've served have been supportive. But there are always one or two, or maybe a block of people who are not. When it comes to, I think it goes to what Deb was just saying. When you have a personal relationship with someone and you've been there when they're going through surgery, or they're in the hospital, or somebody close to them has died, and they know you love them, and they know that when you're talking about immigration policy, that you're not saying they're evil people because they don't agree with how I read the Bible or whatever. They tend to know if you care about them, right? And may end up disagreeing, but will know that you care about them. There's a couple of places where I've had conversations about, well, what it is to break the law, right? So in our congregation, we've had conversations about, are we going to declare sanctuary as a congregation? And several people have brought up, we don't want to break the law. Well, then you have to start talking about, well, what is the law? And, that's when I share personal stories, right? So we have a very active, we have more than one immigrant family in our congregation, but we have one fairly active immigrant family. And so when I can say to them, well, you can see this particular immigrant woman who is here documented, but imagine if you had to cross the border and you couldn't speak very good English like this woman in our church, and you had children like this woman in their church, and you were undocumented and you couldn't speak English, and you're dealing with all the things she's dealing with. And it sort of says, oh, well, here's this person I love, and I know how hard she's struggling, and oh, you can see people's eyes open. Then there's been another, in particular, situation where the issue of, oh, well, if they're criminal, well, then of course we're going to deport them. If they've got a felony, well, and then I'll point to the person sitting next to them and say, did you know that person has a felony? They're like, oh, well, but that's different. Well, how is it different? And then you say, well, that person's felony isn't really fair. Well, right. How many felonies? Our criminal justice system is just as broken as our immigration system, right? And if you get into the racism of our criminal justice system. So it's building that relationship where they trust that you're not trying to tear them down as an evil immigrant, you hate immigrants person. They know that you love them, but you just say, well, here's the actual story, right? I mean, you have an actual story. You can say, hey, look, this is me you're talking about. I've shared with somebody earlier, it's not so much different from the LGBT community coming out. It was like, once you actually know somebody, right? Once you can actually put a person and their story in somebody's heart, then it ceases to become this divisive rhetoric, and it starts to be someone you love. And I think that's the same, this resolution is, I think those of us who are here and supporting it, it's not because we're, yes, maybe we're activists in some ways, but it's not to make a statement so much as it's because we have people we can see, faces we know who will be benefited from this legislation, people who go to our churches or people who we visit. I've talked enough, so I'll pass it on.
I'm actually on sabbatical, so I'm not going to be talking about what's going on in my congregation, but rather what I'm doing now. So first of all, there is actual sociological research, I have been told by somebody who facilitates these kinds of conversations, that if you listen to someone to understand their point of view, not to formulate your rebuttal, not to figure out how you're going to try and tell them they're wrong or change their mind. If you listen to try and understand why their point of view makes sense to them, the research aligns with what I've believed in my gut forever, which is they're more likely to listen to you. And one of the things I've been doing on sabbatical is getting involved with an organization called Better Angels. As in Lincoln's inaugural address, the better angels of our nature, which brings together, as they say, members of the red tribe and members of the blue tribe to listen to each other, to rehumanize each other, and ultimately to form local alliances to work together on whatever the alliance decides. I sat in a 7-hour workshop. I wasn't even a participant. I was an observer. I'm over on the blue side. I was moved to tears by hearing people who self-identify as Reds talk about the exact same values that I hold. So that's what I do. You could look it up, by the way, Better-Angels. It's just gotten organized in the Capital District. You can find us on Facebook too. But it's the only way that I know of to deal with people who strongly disagree with me, is first of all to find out where we actually do agree. And usually the values are shared. The disagreement is in how to get there. And I suspect that that's probably true, to go back to your question, probably true with most members of the Troy Police Department as well. In conversation, we can figure out what we agree on and why it is that we see the world so differently, that we disagree on what to do about it. Now, I'm not particularly a political person in the sense that I don't come up with the answers, but I understand how to help facilitate the conversations.
I think we have one in the back. Right. You prefer this mic? Okay. 3 minutes.
I'm on the Troy City Council. My name is TJ Kennedy. I was the 4th Democrat that made the decision that we should not have passed the resolution that was put forward that night. For many reasons, for what you just spoke about, that I really believed people who were opposing it or had misunderstandings of the legislation or what Sanctuary City meant deserved the same right to be heard or to have a one-on-one conversation, to try to find common values, and try to help them understand and not be afraid. Because what I kept saying to people who were supporting is that the people who don't understand the legislation or who might be against it, I think a lot of it, there might be undertones of racism, but a lot of it is derived by fear. And so I believe everybody, immigrants or not, everyone deserves to be free of fear. And I think by us rushing to pass a resolution without full input would have been a disservice to everyone, especially with the amount of division that we saw come through, which we all as the council did not foresee the amount of division and the blowback and the amount of misunderstanding and misinformation that revolved around the term sanctuary city. So we wanted to keep the conversation coming and going, and we don't want anybody on the left or the right to perpetuate an us versus them discussion. We don't want it to be, why is anybody opposed? It has to be racism. I think instead of coming to conclusions or speaking out of speculations, we really do need to go, the best thing to do would be to listen to or go talk to the other side and reach out. This is one thing I said to the organizers. We got all the people who support this organized to come out and support this, but we didn't take the extra step to try to go and reach out to the other side and get them to understand a little bit more about this. So I think that's where we're at right now as the council is trying to meet somewhere in the middle and just to put a little, not to belabor the first question about the police, but I think because we introduced it, less than 2 weeks from the time we were trying to pass it, not everybody had enough time to digest it. Police were afraid that by us potentially limiting their scope of powers, they weren't sure whether that would make them unsafe. Everybody was just unsure of the impacts. People in the school district, everyone calling, afraid of whether federal funding would be cut based on this, based on whatever the federal government is perpetuating down, whether it's real or not. So we put it forward because we were trying to have these conversations internally. These are tough conversations to have internally with people that oppose it for whatever reason, and we weren't really able to have the conversations that we wanted to have. So we put this resolution forward, and it kind of forced the conversation. And the best thing I saw right now is everyone's having this conversation, the conversation that we needed to have, and we're having. Hopefully, we keep having. And it brings us to a mutual understanding, and really, I hope that the division that this caused can be mended for whatever reason. And I don't want to be falsely categorized as opposing, because I think that was circulating as well. I just thought that giving everyone due diligence and time was the right thing to do. So. We'll keep moving forward, and I hope everyone here can reach out to their neighbor, whether they support it or against it, and help us with the outreach we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had a question right here, didn't we? Did you have your head? Yeah. We'll get to that one next.
My name is Ron Clark. At the Common Council meeting, the resolution was tabled with the idea that they were going to have 2 community meetings to hear more voices on this subject. This is, for many of us who are old enough to remember the Civil Rights Movement or the anti-war movement of the 60s, you know that you have to have education, and you have to have dialogue with people on all sides of the issue, people to develop their understanding. And the 2 community meetings that they're going to have for people who support the idea of having Sanctuary in Troy. We need to be there at these meetings to express our various opinions about the immigration crisis, and try to win over the council members who probably would have voted against it the other night.
My name is Seth Liebson. I live in downtown Troy, and appreciate hearing from all of the panel, including my rabbi. I appreciate what the councilman said. I guess I'm wondering, when will there have been enough sort of discussion, and sort of how much processing do we need to do the right thing? And I don't ask that. I mean, I ask that sincerely. And you know, I am happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk to me about why I think this is important. You know, and I will say that having been to the Public Safety Committee meeting, a lot of what I understood, a lot of the opposition to be not just racist undertones, but racist. I mean, that's what I heard. I'm not, you know, I don't mean to like. And I think that's partly, I mean, what we have here is folks from different faith communities and others. There's organized support. There is also opposition. It's not clear to me, is there a base, you know, like, are there organizations that are opposed with which we can have dialogue beyond the police union and the police, which, as we've discussed, it's kind of hard for us to understand sort of concrete material ways that this will affect what they do beyond what seems to be, again, sort of ideological objections to this. So I guess I speak from an interest in dialogue, and I appreciate, you know, that all voices should be heard, and also, you know, if while we go through this process, one person is detained or deported by what is a very broken and unjust system, that will be one too many. You know, so I think, like, do we have a consensus? Is there a political consensus on the council that after these community meetings, we will then be in a place to make a decision, or sort of what is the plan here, I guess is my question. Thanks.
Other comments? Questions?
May I make a point to that statement?
Sure, go ahead.
You're not going to like this answer terribly, but so long, oh heavens, so long as there is more than one person, the conversation is going to have to continue. So long as there are still people in this community living and breathing, this conversation is going to have to continue. Sanctuary is not something that is fortified or established by a document. While we do appreciate the efforts of our council folk who are fighting for this resolution, Sanctuary is a dynamic relationship. Sanctuary is each and every one of us opening our arms in compassion and in dignity, and in recognizing that self-same dignity in every person that we meet. It's not something that's going to be solved overnight. And ideally, we can continue to move this conversation forward in a more speedy manner. But as the Druids have a bit of wisdom, as fast as a speeding oak, we are tending one another in this great garden of life. There is no one moment that we can say, no, the dialogue is over, because humanity is never over. We are never not in relationship with one another, and there's always going to be issues that appear to give the illusion of separation, but at the end of the day, each and every one of us have the exact same needs. Each and every one of us breathe the same air, draw life from the very same waters, and draw our existence from this land which we share. So long as we have humanity, we must have this dialogue. Just God's willing, we're able to come to a more reasoned approach in that dialogue, and to stop addressing the dialogue from a place of us versus them, but rather from a place as we. Thank you.
You know, I think I have and this is probably fitting because I'm a lawyer and they're faith leaders, but I think I have a more antagonistic approach. You know, I'm willing to have a dialogue with people once I hear a persuasive argument against Sanctuary, which I have yet to hear. And I feel like, you know, and people in this room won't like this, but I felt like the councilman's statements I didn't agree with. I felt like it's just a stalling method at this point from a councilman who doesn't want to take a side in this, who doesn't want, excuse me? It's not a stalling tactic. Okay. From a councilman who doesn't want to upset his Democratic base, but at the same time doesn't want to upset the more conservative elements of Rensselaer County. If the councilman can provide us with a persuasive argument against Sanctuary that he's hearing from some of his constituents, I would love to hear it. but I've yet to hear one.
So I'm going to split the difference. My first thought was to say that it was 2 years ago that I began the conversation with my congregation as to whether or not to declare ourselves a sanctuary congregation, and we have yet to do that. We have not done it. There are many reasons why we haven't, that mostly at this point have to do with the fact that we don't have a shower. So we would not be able to actually house anybody. So there were some practical reasons why we decided eventually that we would not declare sanctuary, but we are prepared at this point to be partners with others who declare sanctuary. My point in saying that is that I wanted them to declare sanctuary right away. I'll just be honest. I wanted them to say, especially because I knew what I was talking about. I mean, I had these experiences. I had to understand that they hadn't had the same experiences that I had, and that there were people who needed to understand and come to their own sense of urgency on declaring our congregation to be either sanctuary friendly, perhaps would be the right word at this point. However, in the meantime, in those 2 years, our social justice team has become extremely active, and now immigration justice has pretty much become the work of that team. There are other things that team does, but my point is that while I wanted them to do, I wanted them to make the declaration right away. I did, I wanted that. By stepping back a little bit and allowing the congregation, those who were on the fence, to come to their own decisions, I gained more support. We, the issues, gained more support by allowing for deeper conversation and education. On the other hand, the question before was, how do you engage in my congregation and others when you have people who aren't on board? And the answer is yes, listening. Rabbi Gordon is exactly right. When you can really hear and listen, it helps to really understand and to be listened to. But there's always a point where I don't compromise. I preach the gospel as I understand it. Yeah, right? Knowing in one particular case that family might leave, I preached it anyway. And so far, they're still with us. And, you know, stewardship season just ended, so they're still with us. So my point being that at some point, even if you're in dialogue, and this is where I'm with you, at some point, there's right and wrong. And we believe that from our faith convictions, sanctuary is the right way to go. And so there's only a point at which dialogue will help, and at some point you make the vote. My final point is to say I'm all in favor of toning things down from those. I was at the Public Safety Hearing Committee, and that was a hard place to be. I'll just tell you the story of my neighbor who would not support sanctuary, but who is married to an immigrant and has biracial children, and I don't get it. I mean, if you want to say this is racism, I'm like, I agree, there's racism in all of this, but I can't quite fathom how this is working, where my neighbor whose children are biracial and children of an immigrant are, and he's anti-immigrant. My Buddhist husband built a gate on our fence. I wanted to hide in the house and not talk to him. My Buddhist husband builds a gate so that the kids can come back and forth and the dogs can come back and forth. And when politics comes up, we politely decide not to talk about it. He knows where I stand, and I know where he stands. We've been able to build a friendship and hang out with the kids and do fireworks together or sparklers or whatever. And he knows how I would vote, and I know how he would vote. And we're able to build a relationship even if we don't agree. And I guess that's what I'm hearing TJ ask for. Maybe he's not here anymore. And that I'm willing to do, but I'm not willing to compromise on the commitment to Sanctuary.
I just want one more comment, one more follow-up. There's a distinction between amnesty and sanctuary. Amnesty is, people who are coming here undocumented get to stay here regardless of what their claim to relief might be. Sanctuary is, if you want to, this is the way I would appeal to police officers if I had to try to. You guys are police officers because, you like to enforce the law, you like to protect people. Sanctuary is going to enable you to do that to an even better extent than you do now. And if you like rounding up people and putting them in jail, as a criminal defense attorney, I'm a little worried about Sanctuary because it actually helps the police officers and it helps the district attorney's office. But if I put my immigration hat on, I like it. So if you're going to appeal to law enforcement, say, look, you guys they like rounding up minorities and putting them in jail. Well, you get to do it all the more with Sanctuary because now you have witnesses that will cooperate with you to put the minorities in jail, which is what you like to do anyway. So that's how I would appeal to them, to their desire to incarcerate people, and Sanctuary will make that easier.
I think the next person already has the mic.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Do I have to stand?
Could you stand, please?
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm a Troy resident. I am, I guess, an anchor baby, so first generation, born to non-citizens, one of whom came illegally and was almost deported, but the immigration system in this country was actually quite different, even up until the 80s, where we actually gave people a lot of opportunities to fix their citizenship. What you would call amnesty now. So when engaging in this conversation and listening to what people say, and hearing what people say, and the nastiest aspects being imagining that to one of your parents. I have an unfair question, which is, how do you really have a dialogue with people who would deny your humanity, your right to an existence? That's my question.
One can always listen. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody is in an emotional place to do that. But if you're in an emotional place where you can listen, you listen. It's not quite the same as having a dialogue. But the other thing that I'm discovering through my work with Better Angels, and I kind of know anyway, is that it's dangerous for our democracy to stereotype the other side. And that obviously goes for both sides. It's easier, but it's often not accurate. I think that one of the things that comes up often, and this, Reverend Gusty, this may be playing out in your neighbor as well, there are people for whom obeying the law as it stands and upholding the law as it stands is paramount. Or possibly as they think it stands. Right? It might not be possible for you to have a conversation. I'm sorry, I can't see you, but you know who I'm talking to. It's for you, that would be a choice to do, to not do. For me, I'm in a place where I could listen. If you get to a point where somebody is spewing hatred, then I have to either decide whether to answer it or just cut off the dialogue. But assuming that that's what hatred or denying your right to exist is necessarily where people are coming from, could be just as wrong as whatever they're assuming about me or about you.
Mr. Ford had a comment here.
So first, let me just say this. If you see me excuse myself, I got a basketball game to go to. My 12-year-old son has a basketball game. It's been a long day. But thank you for saying that. That was beautifully said. It really, really was. You've heard me repeat time and time again, we're at a place where we can finally get something right. What happens when the law is wrong? There are things that have been written down and enforced that are wrong. We can't continue to compromise. We're at a place where we must choose what's right. Simple as that. A couple of weeks ago, about a month or so ago, they decided the little animal cracker box. You guys remember the animal crackers, right? That came in the box. They decided to take the bars from in front of the animals. You get where I'm going? They had enough sense to take the bars from in front of the animals on an animal cracker box, but we have children being placed behind bars right now and separated from their families. Come on. Someone can actually think about an animal cracker box and say, hey, it's wrong to have the tiger and the elephant and behind bars. But we can lock up children? For the last 10 years, I've been visiting Albany County Jail. I go there as part of our ministry. And I'm seeing these immigrants that are locked up. It's sad. I'll say it again. We have an opportunity to get something right. I love this country as much as anyone else, but there have been a lot of things that have been done wrong. It's time for us to look at what's wrong and do what's right. Simple as that.
Debbie, did you have a comment?
I guess I was just going to say that on another issue that faced the city a while ago, I happened to be involved, and surprisingly, I walked my dog in the morning with one of the city council members who was really opposed to the thing that had come up. And, you know, a lot of the opposition was based on unexpected things. And it was interesting to just have each of us be able to go, oh, I didn't know you thought that. Huh. And, oh, you did that for that reason, not because of, and it just got a lot of things straightened out, and it was surprising how the opposition fell away at a public level. And so I think, you know, sometimes, when it is most personal, maybe, you can actually challenge things. To the young woman who said her parents are immigrants, you know, you're in a perfect position to say to somebody, and I know it's not to put it on you, because it's not really your problem. It's not your problem. But you are in a place of knowledge, and maybe somebody else isn't. And sometimes just a simple challenge. You know, when somebody says something ridiculous, I know and I know I'm going on a little bit, I'll stop in a minute, but I did want to say that this other time I was at a party and somebody was going on about, well, you know, it was just wrong that, you know, they were talking about gay people getting married, and she had a client who had two dads, and you know, not to take this into a totally other realm, but she said, and you know, if they allow that, it threatens my marriage. And I just looked at her, and it's like, how? And I don't think anybody had said that. Why do you think that? You know, how? Explain to me where that comes from. And sometimes people who are very vociferous, you can challenge them at the right moment, and you might have a breakthrough. So let's just be open to that.
I think we had a
real quick. I'm
person
sorry.
already with the mic. No, you have the mic.
Thank you, Ruben. Real quick, and then we'll get to your question. I apologize. To bounce off that thought, a lot of the words we're throwing around tonight are focused around dialogue, about talking. That's only one part of the equation. When you meet somebody who wishes to erase your existence, let me say right now that I'm speaking as a gay man sitting in a church that now has a rainbow flag on its altar. 15 years ago, that would not have been a truth. I would not have been welcomed onto a panel such as this as a gay druid priest to speak to all of these lovely people on these issues that we share. But that came about not only from dialogue, but from living our lives openly and honestly and with integrity. And ultimately, how we live our life is the greatest testament to starting that dialogue. So, thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Hi, I'm Ruben Boucher, resident of Troy. Live with this lovely lady, live upstairs from that druid. There were comments made earlier about public charge and the proposed public charge rules under consideration by the Department of Human Services, DHS. And some people may or may not be aware of what these rules propose. And what these rules fundamentally propose is that individuals who seek and receive public benefits can be denied progress on their immigration review, which is kind of stinky because, and it comes back to a point that was made by Gusti earlier, of people who are going through immigration transitions and changes, and the complexity that exists within our current immigration system for individuals. I know of a particular individual who was a college student in the theater program at SUNY Albany, and a brilliant performer, one of the few no dancers who has ever come to America, by my knowledge, and who gave me a profound gift of recognition on some level, but who was, in point of fact, for a moment, not living here under any valid immigration status. Her student visa had expired. Her other papers that she was looking to get recognition as a unique performance artist had not yet come through. And so I would like to sort of understand how we can more clearly articulate when we are attempting to engage in dialogue what our immigration laws currently say about someone who is undocumented. Because I think the assumption is made is that anybody who is here and undocumented came across the border with a coyote and ran through the desert. And that is not the truth of my understanding. And I'm very curious as to how we articulate that.
I think you bring up a really excellent point. You bring up a really excellent point as to the fact, and this I think goes to why it's so inappropriate for Troy Police Department to ask people about their immigration status, because the fact that you were illegal in the United States in and of itself is not an illegal act. So, right? So like you're denied a privilege, and the privilege is your citizenship or your resident card, but the fact that you're here in the United States illegally is not a crime. So why would a police officer want to interrogate people about things that aren't crimes? Because ostensibly their job is to investigate people who commit crimes. That's an administrative issue, your immigration status. And so, to your point, your example of the person that overstayed their visa has not committed a crime. That person may be able to reapply for a visa or apply for a visa extension, although my forte is not visas. I really deal with deportation defense. Your average person, the person who has been in the United States for more than 10 years and is undocumented and has American children can apply if they're put in removal proceedings for cancellation of removal. Everybody has an opportunity to apply for asylum or withholding of removal. But for your average person who's just undocumented in the United States, that person won't necessarily have a form of relief if they don't have asylum or they haven't been here for 10 years. But germane to the conversation we're having, they haven't committed a crime. And so there's no reason to talk to them. You know, and you can talk to people who are opposed to this. You can also say, would it be appropriate for Troy Police Department to go to the wealthiest neighborhoods of this county and just start knocking on the doors and ask people if they've committed insider trading? No. Nobody would think that that was appropriate. Nobody would think that was appropriate. But it's like the same thing. And so if you don't have sanctuary, it's essentially police officers going up to brown people and asking them about their immigration status. Also very inappropriate. So I guess to answer your question more succinctly, people who have asylum claims fear of returning to their country. The country conditions are so that they will be harmed. I represent a lot of people from the LGBT community who have very strong claims. That's a claim that even under Trump and Sessions is still a claim that in certain countries is stronger than others. Mexico is one of the weaker Latin American countries now because it's pretty progressive in like Mexico City. But the other countries, that is a good claim. If you've been here more than 10 years, that's a claim. If you entered, the only times it's illegal are if you enter without inspection and they catch you at the border, that's a crime because they can say you entered the United States without inspection. If they catch you in like Iowa, they don't know how you got in, so they can't charge you with a crime. If you've been deported before and re-enter and they catch you, that's a crime as well. But just being here alone is not a crime at all.
Let's take two more, and they're both in the front row here.
Hello? Yeah.
There we go.
John Flanders, 280 10th Street, Troy. I just want to address the whole question that the president of the city council raised about we're divided. I don't consider that necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that's politics. You know, I mean, a lot of people are uncomfortable about having to take a position. Well, that's too bad. You know, I mean, that's life. You know, I mean, and that's how you achieve clarity in the end. You know, through division, through discussion, debate, and then you finally make a decision, take a vote. Nothing wrong with that. You're not always going to be able to convince everybody, but once you've made a decision, they can decide whether that was a good decision or not. And I think that's where we're at this point. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
One more on the front row here.
I want to throw in just a comment from Jewish tradition. There were two rabbis in the Talmud, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yonatan, and they were best of friends. They never agreed about anything on points of law. And when one of them died, the other one said, "My reasoning is never going to be as good as it was because it was sharpened by the argument." But they were friends. And what's happened over the last some decades is people demonizing each other on either side. It's not the opposition that's the problem. It's the inability to recognize the other as a human.
I'm a bit hesitant to take this one because I'm afraid it's a critique of the moderator.
I am Mrs. Moderator.
You have 2 minutes. You have only 2 minutes left.
I'm the timekeeper. I'm the one sitting here going, yeah, it's a short.
Hold the mic to your mouth.
Okie dokie. Anyway, there's nowhere to stand. Right. I actually have bullet points that I jotted down on the phone just now, and most of them have to do with Ireland, which is a shock to anybody who's ever met me for more than in passing. But anyway, so 'tis the season, and in a secular sense, we're frequently we see Santa Claus as originally portrayed, came from the pen or crayons or whatever of Thomas Nash, 19th century cartoonist, and he was big with, I believe, Saturday Evening Post early on. Well, along with Santa Claus, he did lots of cartoons of me, an Irish-ish person, portraying the Irish as apes. No kidding, you can look it up. Now, on Facebook yesterday, I try not to go there too often because it makes me crazy and I'm an easy crier. And frequently I end up crying and then I have to read more Andy Borowitz from the New Yorker to get over it. But at any rate, yesterday I saw something particularly moving on Pantsuit Nation, if any of you have looked at that group. And in a nutshell, it was a Jewish woman talking about swastikas having cropped up again and things that make me wonder, where am I living and what decade are we in, or indeed what century? Will we have to start carrying our papers? At any rate, this lovely woman made the case that, I believe she said, how much harder it must be for an African American person who wears her difference on her skin than for me. So if Thomas Nash had met me and known me to be Irish, I would be an ape. Mrs. Obama, whom I consider several galaxies worth of light years beyond several people I can think of, was some of those lovely folks who visit the Oval Office these days characterized her as an ape and said now that Mr. Obama is out of office where he never should have been, she can go back to Africa and breed with the other apes. Except I cleaned up the language more than I would were we not here. So here's the last two Irish things. If any of you saw Gangs of New York, Martin Scorsese's film, it was, if you don't know, now you do, or will in a sec, that is an actual book. And while Leo DiCaprio and Cameron, I forget her name, I can picture her, I'll be 68 soon, and I'm practicing to be old. They were fictionalized people. But Liam Neeson's character, who was called the priest because he was Irish, up against Bill the Butcher, Daniel Day-Lewis with a very tall stovepipe hat, real people, the nativists, whose grandparents came a couple generations before the Irish, felt that it was their country. They conveniently forgot about the people who, if you want to say somebody owns land, own the land, until a bunch of pale people showed up and said, mine. And so, in Ireland, my husband and I have twice visited a monument on the Famine Trail, the Famine Road as it's called, in County Mayo. There is, it's a very rough-hewn stone Celtic cross, and on the base of it, there's a plaque with it was a gift from South Africa, the people of South Africa, in commemoration of the Irish famine, which is usually these days referred to as genocide, which it was. Unfortunately, I couldn't conjure up the quote exactly. TripAdvisor wanted to show me lots of pretty green pictures, and I got them myself. But I couldn't get the quote. But basically it says, something on the order of, what does it profit me to treat someone else as less? Why were these people made to suffer and die in the hundreds one night on that road because the Anglo-Irish fixer for one of Queen Victoria's kind of offshoots didn't feel like signing a paper so they could go to the poorhouse and get some gruel and get out of the weather. So, on a brighter note, I would encourage you, any and all, to check out a podcast by Maeve Higgins. She's an Irish woman who's lived in New York City for about 4 years. I read about her, and so I got her book from the library. It's called By a Girl from Someplace Else, is prominent in the title. I forgot the whole thing. And her podcast, which started out more humorous, now deals more with the immigration kerfuffle that we have on the southern border. And she's less funny, but she's more wonderful each time she addresses the issue. And to quote Bishop Tutu, or to misquote him, how could we not at some point say, while dialogue is ongoing, as long as humans are humans, etc., we have to just bite some bullets and buckle down and do what we must as human creatures. That's all.
Well, let me take the prerogative of the moderator and let me make a few sort of closing comments here. It seems to me that this is not it's not a right issue, it's not a left issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's not a Republican issue. I came out of higher education, and professors do a little bit of reading and even sometimes put together visuals to make points. And I've got 2 or 3 of those I'm going to show you right now. Let me first say that the movement is not new. It's 40 years old, I guess. It started in the 1980s. Let's have the first visual. Paul, here's a map of the U.S. Of course. It shows the location of sanctuary cities, counties, and states. And it's interesting that actually there are more counties, I guess, than cities that have been designated. What I wanted to say about this is, you probably could tell by my accent, I didn't grow up in the North. I grew up in the South. I worked in Mississippi. I'm not from Mississippi, but I worked in Mississippi for a long time. And it's absolutely amazing to me when I looked at this map and looked at the list that goes with this map. Jackson, Mississippi is a sanctuary city. Of all things, Jackson, Mississippi. I worked in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, and I would have never guessed that Jackson, Mississippi would become a sanctuary city. So I'm here to tell you that if Jackson, Mississippi can become a sanctuary city, Troy can, and any place in the country can be a sanctuary city if Jackson, Mississippi can do it. Okay? Let's look at the next one. I looked for some results of quantitative research to try to find out how much research had been done on this issue. And this is research Professor Tom Wong at the University of California, San Diego. And he found in his research, as you can see on the slide, that sanctuary areas typically experience significantly lower homicides than comparable non-sanctuary locales. Overall, about 15% lower. Not higher, but 15% lower. The Pew Charitable Trust, the next slide, please. The Pew Charitable Trust did a similar study and found that immigrants are some of the least criminal people in the U.S. Next visual. The International Association of Chiefs of Police stated that state and local law enforcement should not be involved in civil immigration laws, since such involvement would likely have a chilling effect on both legal and illegal aliens reporting criminal activity or assisting police in criminal investigations. Now, some have argued that sanctuary status leads to a weakening of the economy, detrimental to the economy. Let's listen to Professor Wong again in this final visual. In sanctuary counties, income tends to be higher, while poverty tends to be lower. If you deport the breadwinner of an immigrant family, that leaves families more vulnerable, and families become more reliant on public assistance. We can take that down now. So where do I come out? Not that it really matters, but where do I come out on this issue? I believe that sanctuary status will make lives better. This has been suggested already. Make lives better. It will make Troy a kinder and gentler community, to quote a president that we buried just last week. Help our police department in its efforts to improve community policing. It doesn't smear police. We've heard someone say that it smears police. It doesn't do that. And let me digress from my notes for just a minute. I happened to speak with an immigrant this week, and he related to me some really bad experiences that he had with the police department. And I'm a big supporter of the police. We need the police. But this person has had great difficulty with the police. And I asked him if he would come to this meeting and speak. And he responded that, no, I can't do that. I can't put myself in that jeopardy. I can't talk about it. Maybe that's something that the council, the city council, should discuss with the police chief or with the mayor. I think sanctuary status will remove a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. It will remove fear and restore confidence among many residents. They will be happier, they will be more productive, and more contributing citizens. Our community will be enriched, I think, by a greater cultural diversity. And finally, the image of Troy, in my opinion, as a place to live and work will be greatly enhanced in the capital region and far beyond the capital region. So my question is, how can we be against this? How can we? Sanctuary status is just simply, in my opinion, the right thing to do. With that, let me say thanks to the panel. Great job. Give the panel a round of applause. And thank the audience for really good questions and comments. Let's give them a round of applause. And now let's adjourn to Wesley Hall for refreshments. Wait, a comment? Another councilman.
Sorry to interrupt the adjournment. I know we did have a few questions about what's next with the resolution itself, and I just wanted to make sure that that's addressed before we adjourn, although we can certainly discuss it in the other room to follow. There was some discussion about public meetings at our previous council meeting. I want to make it clear that the council didn't agree that necessarily more of the same kind of forum would be helpful. we have been going out into the neighborhoods and into at every venue we can to meet with and find common ground with the folks who are opposed, although I will say the vast majority of folks that we have found thus far are in support. And I thank you all for being out here to continue that. I also want to thank the panel and Bob and everyone for hosting us and for helping empower us with some really important base knowledge and moral and logical background to continue these conversations in our homes and in our neighborhoods over the next few, well, in perpetuity. I think as we've seen and as was discussed, these issues are not going to be resolved by a single resolution. And I think, as noted, this resolution is not what is bringing out this division. This division was here, and it is enabling this conversation to happen, and for us to address some misconceptions and concerns about the roles of immigrants in our communities here. Concerns which are being stoked at the national and county level in ways that are very dangerous to all of us. And so I think it is critically important that we take this moment to step up and have these conversations with our neighbors, with our friends, and make sure that it is clear that the vast majority of immigrants who are here as neighbors, as friends, as contributing members of our society, and that we continue to thank them for their support and their role in our city. That said, the resolution moving forward, we had a meeting scheduled last week with the chiefs and the mayor, which unfortunately they needed a little more time to do a few more bits of research to make sure that they're able to adequately enforce this. I think particularly given the opposition that we saw from the head of the police union, it's important that the chiefs get fully on board with the particulars of this resolution so that they can make sure that that is the policy that is enacted going forward. Just passing a resolution would help make it clear where we stand as a council, and I was ready to do that, but I think it's also critical that we make sure that it is clear where the police department and the mayor stand, which is largely also on this same page, but we want to make sure that they're able to fully enforce that. So I want to thank you all, and I encourage you to continue to have these conversations over the next few weeks, and we encourage you to continue to call and email our elected officials. We value your input, and we certainly will continue this process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and do come back for goodies.